Are we on? Great. I've got camera assistance today. I'm thrilled. Today, I would like to talk about the great value of telling your story the most lovingly you can and with your most earnest seeking of the truth. And I'm seeing the value of storytelling, especially in some of the programs that are either recently finished or just begun here at the Epiphany Episcopal Church in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. We just concluded a 6-week program called Embracing Evangelism that Father Rick taught, and the best parts of it by far were when we broke into breakout groups on Zoom and then shared our reactions, our fears, our thoughts, our hesitations, our victories, and maybe wondering if they were failures on the topic of sharing our love of God with others. But what we discovered is it's grounded in storytelling. The sharing is about sharing just what we know and not pretending for a minute that our truth is a universal one. And a huge component of sharing God's love is to get other people, to encourage other people to get in touch with their understanding of God. I learned this as a chaplain. When you walk in, don't talk about God. Somebody's, 3 days away from their death. If at all possible, get them talking about God, whatever that understanding of God may be, and everything goes well. Get them to pray if you can, and God is most served by that. On the topic of storytelling, we began just last night a program that, in terms of name, you would think shifting from embracing evangelism to discussion on race. You would think those two learning opportunities at the church don't have much in common, with the exception maybe that they're both on Zoom. But in fact, something quite different is true. They're very similar. And Laura Cannon, and thank you, Laura, and thank you everybody who participated. Laura put together a wonderful program, and what drove it each time was she had created little discussion encouraging questions, and it was the individual responses and storytelling that made the race discussion a true discussion, a true seeking of a greater understanding, a greater knowledge, a greater wisdom, and a greater living into God's wish and will for us on all topics, but specific to our understanding and how we live in to race, because we live in a very diverse world. Now, you might notice I've got my bow tie on again. I thought I would share a little story of my own, how I got this bow tie. When I got to California after quitting a gigantic church where I was rector in I think maybe 2012, I just needed a break from being in the leadership of a church, and truthfully, I needed a break from the Episcopal Church, because I've always worshiped in a wide range of things. I grew up Lutheran. I was very active at a bunch of churches in Key West, Presbyterian, Methodist, a Unity church, and I was even active a little bit at a synagogue there. So I was in the mood for some variety. I Googled best black church in Los Angeles. Yes, I wrote black. And we all have our preferences because of how I grew up and where I grew up. That's the singing and the praising that always worked best for me. And so I found a church called City of Refuge. And I went there and I loved it. I loved the preaching. I don't mind a 50-minute sermon. Or if he really gets excited, Bishop Noel Jones would preach us 80 or 90 minutes. And I'd hear every syllable. And I have no problem with people jumping up and saying, preach, because that's what you do when the guy's really preaching the Word of God. And you want more and you're hungry for it. So I was a very happy member of this church, but this church had roughly 30,000 members, and maybe 25 or 30 of us were white. So you're getting a picture for the place. I even joined the choir, and they have 5 choirs there that you have to audition for. And I was too old for the young ones that dance and sing a lot. I didn't have the energy or the moves for the Psalms or the King of David choir. But I was in the men's choir, and I was the first person ever to audition and make his way, first white person, into the sanctuary choir. And I was really feeling proud of myself, the great credibility. And this was from the men's choir dress code. And they said, let's get polka dot bow ties and handkerchiefs, and that'll be our uniform for, the next month or two. Great. Well, I called my friend Leroy Williams from the store when I got there and realized they make black handkerchiefs and bow ties with white polka dots, and they had white ones with black polka dots. And I called him up and I said, I'm not that visual. Which one was the choir leader? And he goes, black dots. Like, black is beautiful. Of course the dots are black. So I said, okay, and I bought black dotted polka dot handkerchief. And of course, when I got there, they're like, no, the thing that's more black is when the whites are the small part. And this choir member said, kind of like you, Chris, you're like a grain of rice and a bowl of meatballs. And so I will always remember that the handkerchief and the bow tie are also in that same theme of we want more black than white. And that was the reality of the City of Refuge. Now, that's a fun story. Let me tell you another one and we'll wrap it up for the day. Since we're on now a 7-week program here discussing race at Epiphany Church, and I'm inviting everybody to join this. Get in touch with us. You can join for the last 6 classes, and Laura and the group will be glad to have you. In June of 2015, in Charleston, South Carolina, a young, troubled, confused, angry, mentally ill, violent man named Dylan Roof walked into a church's Bible study and murdered 9 people in cold blood. I'm sure you remember when this happened. And because God invites me to think positively, I will not say one single syllable about Dylan Roof. Dylan spelled D-Y-L-A-N-N. I think that says enough right there, doesn't it? No, I'm not going to talk about Dylan Roof. He's not worth it. But that Sunday, I wondered, should I go to church or should I leave West Compton black people a Sunday by themselves to mourn the idiocy of white supremacists, the fearful, hateful ignorance of white supremacists? Should that day be there alone? And I prayed a lot about it. And I decided, I'm going to go. I'm going to hear what Bishop Noel Jones has to preach on this topic. And I'm going to pray for healing. I'm going to pray for black power, because I already knew Black Lives Mattered. And any counter to Black Lives Matter is to not understand systemic racism. You think, oh, I disagree with Chris. Then you don't know what you're talking about. And I do. So you should listen. When I get to the church, rightly, a lot of people are looking at this. This is not a church that has a metal detector. Now, I know the ushers are armed because they don't want that money walking out with some drug addict. So they give me a look. I knew one of them well. I'm okay for going in. I go in, I sit down. You could feel the sadness, the tension, the anger. It was palpable, and it was a very different Sunday. And I even wondered, should I be here? But I just kept praying. I said, God, may your will be done. Bring your healing might to our brokenness. Bring your peace to this chaos and unrest. Well, as it worked out, in the middle of the sermon, at one point, one of the grand dames of the parish who sat, maybe, this was a huge, huge sanctuary, held 5,000 people, got right up in the middle of the sermon, walked right across the front in front of the preacher, up the center aisle, came right to me. And she very theatrically and lovingly picked me up out of my seat and gave me a hug, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here, baby." And we just held each other. And most of the 5,000 people could see this happening. And we just sort of swayed there. And she just whispered in my ear, bless him, baby. Bless him, God. Bless you, baby." And just back and forth. And this went on for like a minute or two. She gave me a final hug. She walked right up the aisle, right by the front of the stage where the preacher was preaching the whole time, but watching, and sat back down in her seat. And this sisters and brothers, is what the grace of God looks like. The fact that Dylan Roof is still alive, that's the grace of God. And I hope he's got the wisdom to get on his white knees every single day and thank God that he didn't get the injection that he earned 9 times. We, all of us, can plug into the grace of God. And now, more than ever, it is incumbent upon us to be like that woman and say, to whom and to what and where and when am I going to make the motion of grace and move toward embrace and forgiveness and love, no matter how difficult it is for us to do it. Same with telling your story. Tell your story, even if it's difficult. Tell your truest truth, and God's grace will come to you and through you. And that's what I've got for today. God bless you all.